My name's Chris.
And I'm Kristie.
This is the Washing Up Podcast, and we are here with Tom.
Woohoo! Welcome aboard. How you doing, Tom?
And of course,
excellent. We've just had
and
it.
of course, my screen suddenly just I've now got an internet connection. It's unstable.
Of course. Look, this is the modern NBN, folks. This is the modern NBN. You know what? I'm not going to edit it out. Going to leave it in.
Yeah.
So, how are we doing? It's an absolute delight to get you on the podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's great being here.
Beautiful. So, you've been in many kitchens, I presume, over the years. Is this the first one inside a tent, essentially, that you've done, or have you been outdoor cooking?
Well, we were told it's not a tent, it's a shed.
Yeah, it is a shed. Yes.
Yeah. So we're the Great Australian Bakeoff as opposed to the Great British Bakeoff, which is in the tent.
Yes.
It's a lovely tent. But so in a shed, yes, it is the first time in a shed.
It's a lovely technicality they use there. We did the chat the other year, and they went, it's actually a tent, but we make it look like a shed. And I'm like,
no,
controversy. I mean, again, there are different versions around the world. There's the tent, obviously, in Britain. We've got the shed, and in Canada.
They might call it the tent, but we call it the pavilion because it's got like two big
yes.
and a deck. So, you know,
Kiwi has a
cabana
because it's right near the pool.
And it's like a shed, you just put stuff in. So it's like it's a cabana. Yeah. So the shed is it's a different sort of venue, especially with all the people walking past, their dogs and stuff like that. How hard is it to focus when you go in there with, you know, cameras and bakers and color, obviously, but then also like passers by?
Yeah. Well, it's not that hard because once you're in the shed, you're completely surrounded by everything in the shed. And when I say everything, you've got all of the sort of equipment, you have all of the camera staff, technicians, all of that. So you don't actually focus on what's happening on the outside. Every now and then you do look up and you see people walking past. And there was one incident where a dog actually did run through a shed, which sort of created a bit of a distraction. So that was quite fun.
Isn't it?
Yeah, Mel did that, didn't she? She's like, come on. It's a very Mel move.
Yes.
So what was it that inspired you to sort of go? And I mean, obviously, some people have mentioned on social, and we'll talk a little bit later. But you were obviously on MasterChef, you know, way back when.
Way back.
Yeah. What was it that inspired you to sort of look at Bakeoff and go, let's give that a go?
Well, I mean, you know, we all went through COVID. God, when did COVID start? 2020.
Yeah, 1492.
1492. We went into lockdown in Melbourne, and because usually my partner and I mean, on a weekend, we work hard during the week. Come Saturday, we then go out for lunch. We usually go out for lunch with friends, go out to a restaurant, nice cafe. Lockdown in Melbourne then happens, and what else? What can you do but to stay home and cook? And so what I really started to, and what we enjoyed doing was during the week we'd plan to have this really lavish sort of Saturday lunch at home, just the two of us, and we'd plan the menu. I do all of the cooking, do the baking. We'd crack open a bottle of champagne at about midday. By about 4:00, we still haven't had lunch. But it was all about sort of trying to recreate and do something during COVID that would bring some sort of normalcy to our life. And we actually did that every Saturday. And I really started to discover the joy of baking because I wasn't really a baker. I enjoy cooking and dessert. I wasn't a real sort of big dessert person, but this was an opportunity for me to really discover that. And then at the same time, we actually, because we got a new television just before lockdown, which had Foxtel. And so we discovered the Great British Bakeoff on that, and then the Great Australian Bakeoff. So we then binge watched the entire series, including New Zealand and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so a combination of that sort of weekend lunches plus watching the Bakeoff series, really, when it all happened here in Australia, I thought, actually, you know, why not? I'll throw my hat in the ring. I'm in lockdown again. By that stage, I think we were in about our 10th lockdown. And I thought, look, nothing else to do. I'll just audition and see where I go. And one thing led to the other, and I was in a shed.
Haven't we all been there?
It's like COVID, a slippery slope to the Bakeoff shed.
Correct.
So when you were watching the different bake-offs, were there any particular bakes that you thought, I'm gonna have a crack at that, and you got stuck into it on your Saturday, extravaganza days?
Yeah, a lot of it was sort of cakes, because I really sort of, and I shouldn't say that, because my the very first challenge on the Australian Bake-Off, was a sponge, which I failed miserably at.
It happens to the best
It
of us.
happens.
But I really discovered baking cakes, and also because I've been with my partner for coming up to 30 years now, male partner. We had planned a wedding just before we went into lockdown, and part of that was also I was going to bake my own cake and all of that. And so during lockdown, I thought, look, I'll try and trial a wedding cake. And so it was sort of discovering cake icing, different types of icing, all of that, decorating cake as well. So it was good fun.
And if you're going multi-tiered, of course, then there's structure.
Exactly.
And that's far trickier, as we've had a couple of bakers from different series around the world who have said, think about it for a minute. Everyone goes, oh, cakes are really easy. And then they're like, but how often are you sitting around baking for yourself and go, I think I'm going to bake a 3-tiered with a mirror glaze.
Exactly.
Not really something you're just baking around the house. So that's obvious. And I mean, you mentioned your unfortunate sponge in the first one. I mean, it's something that we see in every series where there's just one thing, and often it's getting used to those ovens, because it's a brand new oven, and people who don't bake sort of go, oh, it's just an oven. There's no such thing as just an oven for someone who bakes. There's a temperamental oven.
I feel like before every shooting, like the bakers should gather around to make offerings to the Bakeoff gods, like just
No, in British
sacrifice.
Yeah.
In British, and I don't think it happens here, but in British, I know for a fact they pre-bake a sponge every morning in every oven to make sure the temperatures are there. And that's just a time thing, and also a budget thing, because they've got the ability to do that. And also during COVID, as you know, we'll talk about in a moment, sharing food a no-no. So what are you going to do with all those sponges?
I know. That was one of the sort of things that really came out of it, was because having gone through MasterChef, you're sharing food and with the crew as well. And during this, you just weren't allowed to actually, that was a big no-no. So we had to be very careful about all of that because of COVID.
So tell us about MasterChef, because you were on season 1, if memory
is correct. I was
experimental season when
Exactly. And I would like to think that it was my season which led to MasterChef being what it is today. If it wasn't for the first season, of course, it wouldn't be.
The positive parts of it. Yeah.
For sure. No, it was good fun. MasterChef is good fun. It was, again, at the time, it was actually filmed in Sydney.
Yep.
I was living up in Brisbane at the time. And I traveled to Sydney. I knew Sydney, but not that well. And so being in Sydney, and we were filming, I was in it for about 3 months. It was actually fantastic because I really got to know Sydney, places around Sydney, restaurants, the cookings that I've seen in Sydney. It was just amazing.
It's one of those things now that we know, which is that Tom is now a specialist at doing food shows based in Sydney. So if you want to get Tom on your show, just base yourself out of Sydney. Give it a shot.
No, I'm thinking of, I may go into Sebastian, so I was thinking maths, maybe.
Well, look, if you want to get your wedding paid for, just stage it and pretend you've never met. I mean, not saying that maths would be staged. Who in their right mind would? I am shocked at that suggestion. It's pure.
Can't we do an Australian say yes to the dress at least? Like,
that would be a lot. I'd be far happier with that, or maybe again a Bakeoff.
Don't tell the groom. Have you seen the Don't Tell the Bride? Like a Don't Tell the
Well, the other thing is Mel and Claire, when they were on, talked about the number of spin-offs they pitch frequently. And I'm thinking a wedding Bakeoff spin-off. And it's just a way for someone to make your wedding cake.
Yeah. I mean, filming's about to start, in a couple of months in the shed. So can't they just build the shed a little earlier? We just get everyone in. To do the cooking, to do the catering for you, fly your family in. We don't have border restrictions anymore. Even WA is opening up.
You've heard
Sorted it.
you've heard of the old play Don's Party. This is Tom's wedding. It's an idea. Put it out.
It's an idea. I think it's a great idea, actually.
We'll come and be your MCs.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee it'll be family friendly, but that doesn't matter.
It'll be fun.
It'll be fun.
It'll definitely be fun. So, did you go in with sort of a very, I mean, and obviously, you know, you have to sort of submit some recipes, some of the recipes beforehand. Did you have a clear idea in your mind of sort of the structure and ideas of your bakes and the themes of your bakes? And I'm thinking particularly your showstopper for week one, which was the Scenes of Home one. Did you have a sort of very clear pattern in your mind?
I did, because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to actually say this, but one of the secrets of Bakeoff is, it does come true, because you're actually allowed to practice. So they give you an idea of what the showstopper is. You're allowed to actually practice that bake, because you then also need to submit that recipe to the production team, so they can actually provide you with the ingredients that you need for the actual bake-off. So I was able to actually practice beforehand. So I went into that showstopper being very confident about what I wanted to actually achieve. Having said that, I went into the sponge challenge very confident, and well, we saw what happened with that one. But yeah.
You had for me, we'll mention the sponge briefly before we get to the showstopper there. Yeah. You had for me one of the great moments of Mel commentary.
Yeah.
You go, I'm going to cover it. I'm just going to cover it all, the meringue. It'll cover everything. And then Mel's like, your plan was great. It's just they cut into it. And I love the cross section, which is just this deep bit of meringue.
All right. See, I haven't actually, and I confess, I've not watched either episode yet. I just cringe.
You're building up to it.
I think I need to actually have a few drinks on a Friday night, late on a Friday night, after a few sherries, put it on and have a real good look at it.
Crack open the bottle of champers on the Saturday and just sit down and do the long lunch. I think it's a long lunch watch. I'll guarantee you that much. But your showstopper that week with especially that mirror. Now again, it's always to watch someone do a mirror in Bakeoff's always sort of it's an interesting watch. Yeah, and that mirror came out beautifully.
It looks like the ocean waves. That's what I loved about it. So did you grow up in the Torres Strait, or is your family just from the Torres Strait? Yeah.
So I grew up in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island, which is the main administrative centre, but my grandparents lived on one of the outer islands, which was quite remote at the time. No electricity, no running water. Very, very basic, but fantastic. I mean, it's really defined who I am today, that upbringing. But then, so I went to primary school on Thursday Island. My parents had moved to Cairns when I started high school. So I did my high school in Cairns, but I would say my formative years were very much up in the Torres Strait, and I go up there as many times as I can. I still have lots of family up there, obviously.
Yeah, and a lot of pet sharks too.
Lots of sharks. Again, I'll confess, because we had to actually do this. We had to do a scene, and it needed to relate back to something personal in our life. And because it was lockdown, I couldn't actually find any miniature figures because you couldn't buy anything, you couldn't go anywhere. And I was actually walking down the street and I found the shark on the street. And so I thought, I need to actually do something. And so I came up with this big story about the Torres Strait, but it's only because I had this one shark.
No, but that makes absolute. I've argued forever when they go, it needs to be something personal to you.
Yeah.
I mean, how are they going to know exactly how personal it is to you? And you're not lying. You're talking about growing up in the Torres Strait. That is all true.
Yep.
Sharks are in the Torres Strait. That is all true.
Yep.
It's all true.
It's like our one of our rules we say for people when they go on to Bakeoff, when something goes wrong, the
Lean
answer is, I meant it.
Yeah.
It's a design choice. So like with your sponge, it's a design choice. I wanted to represent the movements of the earth, and I wanted to represent the importance of the different movements and formations of the earth. That's how you lean into it. So they go, oh, it's wonderful. It's representative.
Look, I have to say there was when I realised what a disaster the sponge was going to be, I actually thought, can I hide this? And I thought, I can't hide this. So I had to be completely open with the camera crew, and say, look, you have to come across, because we had to actually show them as we're baking. And so I had to call them over and say, look, it's a complete disaster. And I thought, I may as well make fun of it.
Hey guys, come look. Hey, you want this angle? Look at the divot.
I mean, like the wonderful thing about Bakeoff is it's not drama porn. It's not one of those kind of like, and what will happen to Tom this week? Will his sponge rise to the occasion, or will it be a flash of disaster? Like, it's not about that, but it's, there can be some iconic moments of where shit just goes wrong. Like, thinking a few seasons back when Fee, you probably saw it recently, when she dropped her pie in the oven and swears came out, and just that, like, it's iconic, so.
But again, the thing with Bakeoff is that it's not about showing the worst in that. It's about the best, and it's about bringing out the best. And one of the things, and we said this the other day when we spoke to Lydia, and obviously we watched it in episode 2 as well, when you get people that go home and it's not because people have stuffed up, it's because everyone's good, and the nature of the competition, again, we consistently ask for an extra baker that's a member of staff, that's not an actual baker, who can, oh no, I screwed up, and go home and make one, so everyone gets an extra week.
I agree. Actually, I think that's a fantastic idea, because it also means we then get used to the oven. We're able to actually... We've proposed this for years. We put it to the prior executive producer, and she's like, I like your idea, but they probably won't go for it.
I've got 2 proposals now. One is the test bake should be dog treats, like if they can do some like dog-friendly things, and then you can leave those out and, like, attract more dogs to run through the shed. Like, oh no, how did that happen? And the other thing too is that test baker could be just a couple of dogs in a trench coat.
That could work beautifully, just stacked on. No one will ever know. A bit like Sesame Street. Like Sesame Street with the dog and someone with a hand behind it doing that would be fantastic.
Please welcome Fido Barkington.
Fido grew up in the other one, obviously the other bake from that first week was the Japanese cheesecake, which is an interesting choice. I think it's a good first technical, because it's pure technique, and there's enough that you've seen those around before, but it's sort of not something that's automatic nature.
No.
So, and especially where you've got a balance between the folding of the egg whites in and have it to puff.
You're talking to Tom. I assume that you just wander down to your local cafe and they have those as well as every other.
Melbourne, they've got plenty of them.
Of course, in Melbourne. Yes, just around the corner. God, that our local IGA, you get that.
Exactly. Walk into IGA. There's tons. Can't move.
Next to the caviar and fragua.
Can't move. And there's a barista who's forcing the coffee into your hand. But how did you find that as a technical, obviously, in week 1?
Look, I think in terms as a cheesecake, it was pretty, well, I won't say straightforward. I think it was more the ingredient, because I think through people there was that plum, I think it was plum that none of us had experienced before. And so I suppose it was trying to balance the taste of that and sort of getting our minds around that with what we would normally associate with the cheesecake. But I mean, look, it was pretty, I would like to think it was pretty straightforward, of course. I mean, I didn't do as well as I thought I would, but it was one of the best times, because I don't know, when you were talking to Lydia, if she described her experience with her cheesecake and what happened with her cheesecake.
The paper, yes, she did.
Because I was baking in front of her, and we were just cracking each other up. It was so funny.
It was she did on the podcast, she talked glowingly about the paper in there going, can you smell that burning? I mean, I can't smell anything, but can you smell that burning? But the other moment from the first episode, and obviously not seeing it, was they showed the moment where in the showstopper where Lydia had to turn around and ask you what the order of the Italian food was. And the look on your face, which was, what? I'm cooking a mirror glaze. What do you, and she's like, is it this? And you're just looking at it going,
She didn't even turn to Carmel, who's also Italian. You know, like
Exactly. I mean, because I haven't watched the first episode, but my partner said to me exactly the same thing. Lydia, who's Italian, asking me, and I just had no idea. I'm in the middle of doing my stuff.
it's not like she's having a crack at the Aboriginal flag and it's like, oh, Tom might be able to help me out. Is it red or black? You know,
she's like, Italian order, and this is look on your face. You're looking at it, going, and she's like, got it. You're still standing there looking, going,
what just happened?
Was that real? Was that a fever dream? Did that just happen? And it's one of my favorite reaction shots of the whole series. And you do nothing, but it's wonderful.
But you do so much.
He worked it out. See, maybe that was what I was going for. I allowed her to actually work it out for herself.
But that's sort of,
you're that coach in the corner,
correct,
you know, that's
correct.
nodding sagely as someone comes to their own realization.
But what that reflects is also that sort of general interaction that you see with inside that shed. And there's not many other food shows you're going to get that conversation. Bakeoff's kind of it.
It is. Oh, I've forgotten about that. That is hilarious.
I mean, I could imagine you and Julie Goodwin, you know, in season 1 of MasterChef, just having a little chat.
Banter.
She's like, "Oh, Tom, you know,
Tom, Italian flag, go."
Well, Julie and I are actually we're still quite good friends because we were rooms together because I like Bakeoff, where we each had our own sort of room apartment that we can actually practice bake in. MasterChef, we all were in the same house and we all had to share bedrooms. And so I shared with Julie. So we had a great time together and we still keep in touch with each other.
oh, that's fantastic."
Again, I like this idea. Messages Julie afterwards. So I've just done Bakeoff. Yeah, how was it? Well, there's this one woman that just asked me about the Italian flag. Julie's like, "Are you sure it was Bakeoff you were on?"
Oh, no.
Could have been Mastermind.
After the sponge, I thought, I am not telling anyone about Bakeoff.
Not doing anything there.
So, you know, having left the shed, I hope it hasn't left you with too much PTSD. And
A
little, yep. Have you ventured back into baking? I mean, I guess, you know, there's a lot of new things for the Melbourneites at the moment, you know, back into the real world, back into working, back into...
Well, no, because, I mean, you know, our weekend lunches, when I was going out, I mean, I just don't have time to bake anymore because our weekends fully booked out.
The booze at brunch is back.
The long lunches are back, except the long lunches are now out at restaurants and not at
Exactly.
The joys. Oh, I love Melbourne.
Before we move into that, I wanted to ask you, so having watched the run of Bakeoff, obviously in lockdown, were you aware when you got to Biscuit Week, and in particular your showstopper, the jam drops had been a haunted bake?
Oh, God. Can I say, as a start, though, you know, the two things that I went into and I was very sort of nervous about was, and not realising what the bakes would be, was to make a sponge.
Yep.
And biscuits. I actually dislike baking biscuits. There is something about biscuits that I just do not like. I like eating them, of course, but actually making them, I just find them such a pain to make.
It's, as I said, we said jam drops in particular. So jam drops, I don't know if you remember the technical from a couple of years ago where everybody failed the jam drops. We might still give bakers grief about that one.
That said, Tom, I think yours were actually better.
Yeah, yours were better than the technical. You beat the technical out. I'll give you that one. And I may have.
If you baked those in that technical, you would have come first.
And I don't know if you heard, but I may have described your contraption as jam drop Sputnik.
I liked the mid-century modern feel myself. Like I got it. It was very.
It was based on that very much. So it was based on a chandelier that I'd seen in New York. And when I look back now, I thought, what a wank that was to actually say. I should have just said it's a bloody Sputnik. And when I look at the picture, it does look more like a Sputnik than this bloody chandelier that I saw in New York.
It's the whole, again, part of the ethos of Bakeoff obviously is the ability of the bakers and the technique and the technical, and the other half is your ability to bullshit when things go wrong, and your ability to go, this is exactly what I was after. You know, I was after that feel.
Like, do I want a real chandelier? Or do I think satellites are chandeliers in the sky?
Yes.
You know, like they're just
it's a Russian chandelier. So it's very important. I mean, and look, you were at least honest with people at the start, because you said at the very start of the episode, you're like, I like eating biscuits. Not as big a fan of making them. You didn't fall into people's trap, which is where they go, this is my week. I've got this, which is usually code for going home. So at least you didn't fall into the trick for early players.
Yeah.
So what weeks were you hoping for? Was bread sort of where you were going? Or?
Well, bread was where I was going every other week. But, you know, in hindsight, most likely every other week I would have done the same bloody disaster at the start anyway. But I was looking forward to bread week. That was one. And then there was some other some other bakes that were coming up, which I thought, you know, I'm going to be pretty good at this. And of course, that was
that's like poor Lydia, who on the podcast, to get her on, she goes, biscuits are my thing. She's like, I was crushed. She goes, I go home and I'm like, next week's biscuit week. No, this is my thing. She's like, I was so disappointed. So
it's only the week after I left was bread week.
Yeah, exactly. The week before the thing you're looking for is the thing you're going home on. That's cursed.
It's like when you go to the Easter show with your family and you really want to stay for the fireworks, but maybe someone got sick and we had to leave early for the fireworks. And so missed the fireworks. It's just that, you know, that disappointment that you had to leave early.
But although you didn't get to like taste the other bakes, obviously, because you weren't allowed to with COVID, were there bakes in particular where you were looking around and going, oh, I like that. That's amazing. Were there things that sort of drew your eye?
Yep, there were some. There are some. Were some bakers that even by the end of the first week, where I thought, you know, that they're really, really good. And looking at them from an aesthetic point of view, they were fantastic. Some of them we could taste. We actually just snuck a taste of each other's sort of bakes, and they tasted good as well. So,
are you thinking of commissioning Nerman to do an installation, like in your gallery? Like, I know. Sorry, we're kind of jumping 3 topics ahead, I presume, but you know.
It was a very because we're also busy doing our own sort of sculptural piece, chandelier, and he's done this amazing technical threading of, it was just amazing. That's the only thing I can actually say.
The idea of like individually threading each one of those.
Here's your problem. I've just picked up on it, right? Your inspiration was this chandelier in New York, you know, very highbrow. His inspiration, Pocky. Like it was like a snap.
You're aiming at different audiences, Tom. It's a simple. I do have to credit you, of course. For me personally, I have to credit you because outside of the one time where you were forced to as part of a technical, you avoided matcha, and I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled. It's so overused, and I mean I've told Bakeoff in the past for this, but I'm so thrilled that you were able to sort of the purity of Bakeoff, as it were, avoid matcha.
I'm so sorry, Tom.
Were there any sort of, are there legitimately, not just making fun of the matcha thing, are there any ingredients that you were like, well, I'm definitely steering clear of those sort of profiles?
But can I say matcha definitely was one of them? Because I mean, you see it on a lot of the other bake-offs where that really, and also because I mean, I haven't used it before.
Yep.
I don't see it a lot in the supermarkets that we have around here. I don't know why, because I mean, I'm in Fitzroy, Collingwood, the bloody
everything.
epicenter of your community. But when I went to Sydney, I actually saw matcha tins everywhere, and I thought, oh, maybe I should. And then I steered completely.
Smart.
Stay away from it. Stay away completely.
You just heard Chris's ghostly voice in the background going, "Who is this bloke? Why is he?"
And I made this point. I actually ducked onto Nerman's live on the week. He did a live on Instagram because he was like, "You need to explain it." And what I said was the same sort of thing you said there, which is my problem with matcha is that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's been on all these bake-offs and it's just so used.
And my argument today is so is chocolate, so is vanilla, so is orange.
True. Very true.
True, but what would you rather? Would you rather a cake powdered with matcha or a cake powdered with chocolate? I know the answer to that
I'm
question.
taking the chocolate.
I know you are. So therefore, don't complain if it's something you're going to want. Simple. So to move away from baking for a minute, what I actually want to sort of, they mentioned, of course, that you were the CEO of a non-profit.
Yep.
And I would actually like to talk to you about what you do. So I think it's the Koori Heritage Trust, I believe.
The Koori Heritage Trust.
So please just tell us about the Koori Heritage Trust.
So it's a not-for-profit Aboriginal arts and cultural organisation, and it's very much about representing, promoting, supporting, celebrating Victorian Aboriginal. It's really Southeast Australia, but we sort of say Southeast Australia, especially, particularly Victorian Aboriginal communities, because when people actually think of Indigenous Australia and Aboriginal Australia especially, people automatically think that in Queensland, Northern Territory, top of WA, you don't have that in Victoria anymore. Whereas you actually have a very strong, very vibrant, living community here in Victoria. The problem is people actually think all Aboriginal people are black. And you have a range of, you don't see, just because people don't see the black person on the street does not mean that there's not an Aboriginal community. So the work that we do is really about promoting that you actually have a Victorian Aboriginal community that's still here, despite the history of colonisation, long colonisation, oppression, stolen generation, and all of that.
It's like, for me, I'm always like in awe of, like, everyone talks about resilience and stuff, but just the culture that has survived such, like direct attacks and basically a war on it from day dot. And to be able to see, like, not just older people sharing culture, but the younger generations too coming through and, now celebrating their culture. It makes me, as a white Australian, proud to be Australian when I see that. Because that's the Australian I want to see. So thank you for the work you do.
And in a lot of cases, obviously, finding culture that was either lost or in the very least denied for the longest period of time is something that people now, and I see it. I'm a teacher, and I see it in young people as they're sort of discovering culture again and going, okay, this is something that I do feel more bonded to and more of a kinship with. And so again, things like that are sort of really vital to make sure that culture can stay relevant and prominent.
Yeah, and it is really important, I think, to actually acknowledge that in Victoria, New South Wales as well, to an extent, and Tasmania, that you don't, just because you don't have the sort of cultural ceremonies, traditions that you actually see up north, doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a community of down here as well. And I think in a way, I mean, tourism promotion of Australia is very much about the top end, the David Gulpilil in the outback, all of that, whereas you still have, people don't recognise the fact that you actually still have that. And even here in Victoria, people still don't realise that there is this strong community that's down here. And I mean, look, if I can quickly go to Bakeoff, part of the reason for me going on to MasterChef in the first place and Bakeoff was really, firstly, look, I enjoy cooking, I love baking, I really enjoy doing that, but it's also to actually promote my community, the Indigenous community in Australia, firstly to the broader community, but at the same time, also for my community to actually say, hey, we can also be part of this broader reality TV.
Absolutely.
We can all be part. We don't necessarily need to actually be afraid of actually just being out there and putting yourself forward. So that was one of the key reasons as well for me to actually go on to something like Bakeoff.
And it's one of the things that Bakeoff traditionally with all sorts of communities has done very well, which is give a visualization and give a presence to communities that feel like they don't have one.
Yeah.
Particularly on Australian TV.
Especially on Australian television. Yeah. And it gives everybody that opportunity. And again, as you were saying there, talking about it, especially in Southeastern Australia, that ability to look at it and go, no, that is something that's achievable. That is something we can see, and that is something we can connect to. And that's, again, that representation matters. It genuinely matters.
Yeah. And I mean, there are a lot of really great bakers out there from the Indigenous community. I mean, I have people in my family that I look at how they bake and I thought, wow, you're fantastic. You've got the skills. You just don't have the confidence of actually putting yourself out there to go on to something like a Bakeoff. I mean, there's this amazing Facebook group called Mopfeed, which is all Indigenous, and it's all about Indigenous people posting food, Indigenous food, or just things people actually cook. And some of the things that people actually put up there, you think, wow, this is amazing. I mean, there really is a bit of talent there. And hopefully by my doing this would encourage other people from my community to actually think, actually, maybe I can actually take my sort of home baking, home cooking to a broader sort of audience as well.
It's one of the things that we've sort of talked about a lot on the podcast. I talk about a lot in my education background as well, which is that food's often the gateway as well, especially when people are either hesitant to look at other cultures or embrace other cultures or even sort of find out more about it. Food is the gateway in a lot of the time. And we've seen that with migrant communities coming into Australia, that food's the way that people stop fearing the other and start working. And I think that the same as you said there in terms of with Indigenous communities, the same thing exists. It's that idea of start embracing the food cultures, embrace that sort of cooking. And it's a way for people to sort of go, okay, let's talk about this and see more about what's going on.
And I think it was great and I mean, that was one of the episodes that, or one of the weeks that unfortunately I wasn't part of.
Yeah.
But kudos to the Bakeoff for doing the Homegrown Week, which was really about showcasing Australian Indigenous ingredients, which I thought was a brilliant thing to actually bring that to people's attention as well.
And absolutely. And like one thing I want to see more of in shows is not only just showcasing the ingredients, but showing people how to access, how to use it at home. So it becomes, like we create sustainable businesses, hopefully Indigenous led businesses, because this is, the earth that's sustained your culture for all these years, and now it's being shared with us. So there needs to be that give back. Because I love finger lime, that's just one small gift coming through.
And it's something as well that MasterChef has tried it recently with the introduction of more Indigenous ingredients. And while I do applaud him for doing it, it's not so much someone with the Indigenous background, it's Jops on Frillo doing it. And I'd like to see more of the actual Indigenous voices being heard going, this is how we've used this is our tradition and our culture, and sort of using their expertise and using their skills.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And one of the great initiatives down here in Melbourne through the City of Melbourne is what they're looking at is plantings along the Yarra River of more Indigenous sort of planting, but also food plantings as well. So, I mean, it's a great way of sort of bringing that to people's sort of consciousness in terms of Indigenous culture, this thing about food.
Yeah.
Are there any specific sort of ingredients that you didn't get to use that are native in style that you would have loved to have got to have actually demonstrated in your bakes?
I think quandong. I know everybody uses quandong. Finger lime. There was one, I was really hoping to use finger lime in one of my bakes, but unfortunately didn't get to do that. So, yeah.
When you mentioned quandong, that reminds me of the first time I ever heard about quandong. My mum was a guide leader or a brownie leader, and they went and did some education with the Aboriginal people at Koori, and I can't remember the people there, but but she come home, she goes, so excited, we got to taste condoms, and I'm
oh no.
She stopped, she goes, quandongs, we got to taste condoms.
That's hilarious.
Hopefully, if you did request quandongs, they didn't hear it like my mum said it.
Get it wrong. They're like, okay, if that's what you're going to bake with, well, more power to you.
Here's your flour, here's your sugar, here's your Durex.
The bake's got a rubbery texture. I'm not sure why is it got a rubbery texture? Can't work that one out for the life of me. But overall, when you were inside the shed, obviously, in terms of what watching those other bakers, were there things that you saw technique wise you were like, oh, I'm going to borrow that one?
Not really, because you're focusing so much on your own bake, and you're under the pressure of time, being very conscious that as soon as you start baking, I mean, you lose all sense of time. So you're so focused that you actually tend not to be aware of what some of the other bakers are doing. So really, if anything, it was more seeing the end result, where you go, oh God, I mean, that looks fantastic. I'd like to actually try and achieve that, as opposed to some of the techniques that they would have used to actually take it, bring them to that sort of final product. I think in a way, once I actually get over the trauma of my failures, that I will sit down after a few champagnes on a Friday or Saturday night and watch the entire series, the entire episode of this season, and see what people were actually doing.
And what you will see when you watch it too, though, is, you mentioned your failures. You're not going to necessarily see failures there, because again, as I said, that the sponge, while again, there's a crater. It's the first bake, and they happen all the time. And the rest of that week was pretty good. The mirror glaze was very good. Yeah. And we've seen mirror glazes fail. My favorite is whenever you see the mirror glaze and they pour the mirror glaze on, it just sits.
Yeah,
it's like a clump. Yeah. So when you get a mirror glaze that pours, you go, that's a win.
Yeah.
And again, in that second week, it was literally down to like splitting hairs, and it wasn't because of failures. It was because there are rules that say somebody must go home.
Yeah, that's very true, very true.
And so again, I think that your time on there is was
quality over quantity, Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to think the same thing as well.
Oh, completely.
And I really do want to see a lot more, Indigenous people on screen cooking and baking away, whether they're creating epic, creations or having epic failures. I just want to see more Indigenous people on screen, because that's...
No, I completely agree, because I mean, it's great that we celebrate our multiculturalism, that we reflect our sort of Italian heritage, Asian heritage. I mean, we have on this season, some Iranian, I think.
African.
I mean, it's great that we're actually celebrating that multiculturalism, but I think in all that, we also need to actually promote the fact that we also have this Indigenous community as well, and that should be part of this broader multicultural Australia that we all want to live in.
If you've got the oldest continuous culture on earth, you should probably do a bit more to feature it.
Not only the oldest Indigenous culture, the first people to do baking,
Completely.
It might not be 3-tiered bloody wedding cakes.
How do you know it
dangling from a chandelier?
How do you know it wasn't 3-tiered wedding cakes dangling from a chandelier?
That's true. I don't have that oral tradition, but
I'm sure there are stories somewhere of dangling wedding cakes. It's got to have been somewhere within the heritage.
Wyoming and the dangling wedding cake. It's not well known. It's not like Tiddalik.
It's not well known, but it's there somewhere.
Yeah.
It has been an absolute joy and delight to get to speak to you, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Is there anything you want to spruik, like websites?
Anything you want to plug? Go ahead.
Insta, upcoming events for.
Not really. I mean, of course, I encourage people to come and visit the Koori Heritage Trust. We're at Federation Square. When people feel comfortable coming into the city, please come and visit the trust. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, I have an Insta, which I think I only have about 10 followers anyway. So.
We can fix that.
We can boost that to
We can fix that for you, Tom.
We'll get you from 10 to 15.
11, and one of them will be my partner.
50% improvement. But no, and obviously we're going to reshare all the information about the Koori Heritage Trust as well. So please go and check everything out. And again, as Tom said, if you can, when you feel comfortable enough to do it, go and check it out. I mean, if we could just pop down from Miscellaneous City, we would. So
we will.
And when we can, we definitely will. Thank you for coming on, Tom. It's been an absolute delight. Until next time, I'm still Chris.
I'm still Kristie.
And we will catch you all later.
And we'll see you at Tom's wedding 2 weeks before Bakeoff starts going. Claire, I'm looking at you to be the flower girl because you've got the dance moves.